Anyway, our mission for this Hiring Women podcast is to make financial conversations accessible, just so that hiring women can make confident financial decisions and live the life they truly deserve. I'm Jackie Porter, in case you haven't been with us before. For those of you who've tuned in before, you know I love connecting music with our theme for our podcast. And this song by Pink, in case you didn't know, and thank you, Kim, for your song suggestion. Would love to know if you've ever played this song or heard this song by Pink. I've heard Pink in concert now twice, maybe 3 times, and I've never heard her sing this song. Anyway, Sorry, say what were you going to say?
I've been to her concert too. I've never heard her play this song, and it's a great song. I
want to know if it's like from a movie or something, right? Because it kind of gives that vibe to it. Don't hustle me. Anyway, she's talking about being hustled, which is so aligned with what we're going to be talking about today. I know when I talk to hiring women, including myself, it's a fear that as a hiring woman, especially as we age, I actually have heard the term, it's commonly thought of as like being a nurse or a purse when they're getting together with someone. That's a real consideration and it's a real concern. And today, because of this, we're talking about a very crucial topic, estate planning, capacity, and this whole rise of something I never heard before. So thank you, Kim, on predatory marriages. So we're joined by seasoned legal expert Kimberly Whaley, founding partner of Whaley Estate Litigation, and she's going to give us a whole lot of insights into this process of safeguarding our assets. So Kim, welcome to the Hiring Podcast, and thanks again for the song suggestion.
So nice to be here, Jackie. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries. So for those of you who have never heard the term predatory marriage before, I knew what financial scams were, but I'd never actually heard the term predatory marriage before. What they are relationships where one partner enters with ulterior motives, often targeting the financial assets, status, or security of the other partner. So hiring women, of course, are particularly vulnerable to this type of exploitation. And of course, the fallout is life-changing. So let's talk first about understanding capacity, Kim, and really what the role of power of attorneys are, because I know lots of women out there, I talk to you, you know who you are, you put off doing your will or your power of attorney. So let's talk a little bit about why capacity is a cornerstone of effective estate planning. Why is it essential for us to understand capacity when we're creating things like power of attorneys or even continuing power of attorneys, CPOAPs, which I didn't know that there's a difference. There was POA, power of attorney, and then CPOAP, which is continuing power of attorney. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. So for so many reasons, Jackie, capacity underscores almost the entire rationale for power of attorney planning. So the capacity to make any decision, including the ability to manage property, to grant powers of attorney, either for a person or for property, is demonstrated by the ability to understand the information relevant to the decision being made, and then to understand the consequences of that decision. At law, there's a presumption of capacity. Without capacity, an individual can't legally revoke or make a power of attorney document, whether that be for a person or property. It's obviously the lawyer's duty to assess capacity when a person is making these documents. But you should note that often these documents get drafted, they're printed off the internet, and there's never a lawyer involved.
Ouch.
So,
Ouch.
Yeah. So, but these planning documents in particular are good planning documents to do early in life and to revisit them through life while you're able and free of influence to choose a person that you really trust to manage your affairs. Capacity is ultimately determined later by a court, usually through medical evidence, through layperson evidence. The determinations will look at the task undertaken, the time it was undertaken, and the situation or circumstances. And with respect to powers of attorney for personal care, I'm going to say they're a little less important, only because we do have this. We have this provision under the Healthcare Consent Act that sets out not necessarily a hierarchy, but those persons who can make substitute decisions for treatment decisions and care decisions. So there is a statutory regime, but if you want to make sure that you choose the right person, then definitely plan in advance. And these documents can avoid or at least minimize the risk in depletion of assets later on in life, misappropriation, appropriation fraud, and becoming victim to some sort of scheme. Can't avoid it altogether, but it also might avoid guardianship proceedings, which are very expensive and an alternate to power of attorney planning.
Yeah, it's actually pretty scary when you think of it. I've heard and watched, I'm sure some of people in our confidant community have watched those horror stories of financial scams gone wrong. And you don't think about it, the marriage part is also very financially concerned.
Yeah, I heard just this week, a new term called muling. I heard that from a detective with an elder abuse unit. And muling is where an older adult is targeted, mostly women apparently, and they're taken from financial institution to financial institution to move money around with the end result that the monies go out of the older person's account to some other destination. I'd not heard that before.
Muling. I'm going to look it up. Thanks a lot. I'm learning so much. I always get so educated when I talk to you, Kimberly, around the law. So tell me, what are some key elements around a good power of attorney or a continuing power of attorney that people need to understand?
Right. So just to note, the continuing part of the power of attorney for property is that it survives incapacity.
Okay.
Previously, or if you just have a limited power of attorney, it doesn't survive incapacity, and so it stops when the person becomes incapable. I think that a robust power of attorney document should clearly set out the scope of the authority granted. Obviously, you have to have regard to the legislation that governs the document and the common law. It's important to state wishes in it. And I suppose consideration of whether or not any conditions should attach to the authority granted and how to activate it, though those triggering provisions in itself can cause issues. So I'm not advocating for them, but for sure consideration is important. The most important thing would be to consider appointing somebody who you definitely trust, who is going to be loyal and honest and carry out capable wishes and to act in your best interest. And then I guess considering the safeguards that might also be placed in the document, maybe you want to appoint a joint attorney so there's a check and balance system. Think about, does it make sense to put two siblings together who don't otherwise get along? That might not work so well. Right. And then maybe reportings on the management of assets. It's definitely important to pre-plan, to stay on top of any life changes and legal developments to help avoid future risk. Obviously, all the risk can't be taken out of the situation. But no planning at all arguably presents a greater risk. And you don't want to get into this guardianship situation.
Talk to me a little about that. I'm just curious before we move on, because that I think is something people don't really think about until you're there.
Yeah. So if there is no pre-planning and there's no power of attorney in place and substitute decisions need to be made for an individual, then there will be no choice but to have a guardianship of sorts. In Ontario, there's two types of guardianship. One that's court-appointed. So you bring the application with your management plan to have yourself or somebody appointed to manage the person's affairs. It's costly, right? Or there is a statutory guardianship. So if there's a finding of incapacity, let's say under the Mental Health Act or in a hospital, there's no power of attorney present, statutory guardianship may issue to the public guardian and trustee. And so if you want certainty, power of attorney planning is the best way to go about it.
Wow. So when do you think, are any life events that trigger when people should maybe look to update their power of attorney? Let's talk a little bit about that. When should people consider revisiting or updating their power of attorney or even their continuing power of attorney? That's something I think people sometimes maybe put to the side as well. They need to get to it, but they don't.
Sure. I think you need to check in with yourself every once in a while because things change, your views on things change. And so you always want to check in and think about, well, how would I want my affairs managed differently now in my lifetime? But then there's significant changes, right? So marriage, divorce, the birth of a child, a grandchild, maybe even the divorce of a child. And then when you acquire or dispose of property, if you've made designations in any of your asset base, you might want to revisit how you've crafted your documents. So I think you should do it regardless every couple of years, just to make sure that you're current.
Yeah, I love that you talked about your kids getting divorced and what they might, what that partnership might have, like how that might change things, and obviously marriage. Let's talk a little bit now about this troubling issue of predatory marriages, and why do you think they're becoming more and more prevalent? Are there reasons for that? Because that is something that is definitely on the minds of the higher earning community of women I deal with.
Yeah. So a predatory marriage is, as you said earlier, it's where a vulnerable individual is taken advantage of purely for financial gain or profit. And although predatory marriages may be a little more devastating, so too are predatory unions or relationships, full stop, because you get access to property. I think the rise in it is really tied to a couple of things, and they're societal. And that is that we have an aging population worldwide, and we have a huge amount of wealth being transferred now in the next 25 years. I think the statistics say $83 trillion US is going to pass hands from those sort of in the 80 to 85 bracket to persons 54 to 59 years of age. We know that dementia is on the rise, and the numbers are set to triple by 2050. I think that puts the number at 139 million. And then complex family structures. We have marriages, second marriages, third marriages, later life partnerships. And community isn't what it once was. We sometimes don't even know our neighbors, or we don't live in the same city or province or country as our children or our friends. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason for the rise is society.
Yeah, I mean, I think the noted about this $1 trillion wealth transfer that probably a lot of people are factoring into their financial plans. And as you said, this aging population and dementia and loneliness, right? I think that's a huge epidemic. That
loneliness is a big one.
Yeah, because that's the other thing I was going to mention is what makes people vulnerable. Like we know why there's a rise, but let's talk a little bit about vulnerable and maybe the legal definition of vulnerability in terms of predatory marriages. What are some things that people need to understand about what it means to be legal from vulnerable from a legal perspective?
Right. So I don't think there is a legal definition of vulnerability, but certainly it stems from the ability to be victimized, so coerced or pressured or influenced in a way that is going to benefit the predator. And so in many situations, not in predatory marriages, we know that children may be pressuring their older parents to receive some benefit that maybe their siblings aren't receiving, or that they need, or to service their own like mental health issues, let's say. So
it's funny you mentioned that, Kim, because we're seeing in the financial world, we actually have to identify vulnerable people in our communities, right? So seniors, for example, my senior clients are considered vulnerable, and we have to take steps to safeguard them just based on children, like, as you said, like taking advantage of their finances.
Yeah. So, I mean, vulnerability could come from disability. Is somebody challenged to hear things, to walk, to get to the grocery store? There's an interrelationship with dependency and, who the older adult, for example, is surrounded by on a daily basis. So the vulnerability is a big one because often it falls short of incapacity, yet some of the same consequences arise.
Let's talk through that. So it falls short of incapacity, but the same issues that make somebody who is fully incapacitated potentially vulnerable. Let's talk about that in terms of women. Like, why are women so targeted as vulnerable individuals in these predatory marriage scenarios?
Right. I don't know that. First of all, I don't know if there are any statistics. They're unknown to me. I would imagine there are none because a lot of these cases don't get prosecuted. I'm not sure in the predatory marriage context that women are disproportionately targeted over men because we more ordinarily see a much older adult male with a much younger female, and the older adult male is the one providing the wealth in the relationship. There's no children. And then there's this, because of the vulnerability, the ability to alienate or isolate or sequester. That's not to say that there are not cases where women are targeted. I've had them in my office, and they're very sad because, especially, there may be situations. This wasn't my case where. In the relationship a woman had, her husband predeceased her, and then all of a sudden she's taking on the role of property management where she didn't take on that role before. So is new to it. And I guess the other thing would be that, in my case, I had a very wealthy doctor. She was preyed upon by the building superintendent in one of the buildings that she owned. And so she was very wealthy. She was sick, and nobody detected it because nobody has this red flag that all of a sudden goes up on their forehead and says, I am no longer capable of making decisions. And so even those really close to people like your parents, it takes a while to see what's happening. And the predator may already be in there causing havoc in the personal financial affairs of the person.
Well, what I'm hearing from you is it seems like predatory marriages are kind of an equal opportunity scenario where men and women are vulnerable. At the same time, with this rise in the wealth transfer going to women who are living longer, they are definitely, and just because they're living longer and ending up with the assets, they are definitely needing to be more vigilant around their finances and making sure they have somebody that they trust, that they regularly confirm they can still trust, look after their finances and their care.
The problem is the devastation that comes with these predatory marriages. In many jurisdictions, marriage revokes a will, so your estate plan has then gone out the window.
Right.
It's not true of Ontario anymore because in 2022 we had legislation that changed that. But it doesn't eradicate the problem because you still gain access. And so the courts are constrained by case law, common law that developed in the 1800s that said marriage is a simple test which doesn't require a high degree of intelligence. That
actually freaked me out. I remember one of the cases around this where it's like, you don't need to be smart as long as you decided to sign on the dotted line that you want to be married. You give up, being intelligent about being married. So I just thought, it's crazy.
But way back then, there were no property rights that attached to marriage. We didn't have marriage legislation that provided for spouses during life and after death. Women didn't have property rights.
That's true.
And so it's just a situation where that common law has not kept pace with the development of marriage legislation. And then on top of that, you have this standing issue of who can attack these unions. So unless it's if it's undue influence or fraud, only the parties to the marriage can dissolve the marriage. And we had cases in Ontario which are not predatory marriage cases, but they're predatory relationship cases where the person was vulnerable, but then in the end was able to divorce because not incapable.
Right.
So it really is terrible because the dignity of the person is being attacked close to the end of their life.
Yeah.
Their friends and family don't know about it. They feel badly afterwards because they didn't protect their loved one. And then the money goes to this predatory spouse.
Right.
And it's unbelievable.
So, folks, did you know you don't need to be of sound mind to be married? I'll never be blown away enough by that. Like that just completely throws me off. So how can we avoid these really, really unfortunate money memories that I find, people at nearing the end of their life are leaving their families with when it comes to predatory marriage? So what are some of the red flags that we should look for to potentially identify these potentially financial exploitative marriages that are happening without the families or loved ones really even knowing what's happening? What are some red flags women should look for?
Just as citizens, society, community needs to keep an eye out for the elderly. I mean, it just has to happen, and we have to come around to thinking in that way. And it's not that we wish to sort of encroach on their autonomy or their rights, but it's keeping a watchful eye and looking for things. So things that don't make sense, unexplained accidents or injuries might indicate some sort of physical or domestic abuse, right. Changes in living arrangements, unexplained inability to pay bills all of a sudden or not file taxes, a change in banking patterns, writing checks for $9,000 instead of $90, changes in appearances and behavior, entering into legal documents without an understanding and sort of in an unprecedented way. So those sorts of things we can keep an eye open for.
I was going to say, have you ever dealt with a senior? Because I find that, that's some of the things, the challenges that children, the clients I deal with, so they have their parents who are aging. You ask them about their business, they give you these looks. It's like, don't meddle, right? So it's kind of like, how do you do this delicate dance of trying to stay on top of what's going on with mom and dad or mom, and also respect the fact that they're adults that do their own things.
I hear you, because I do a lot of this elder law litigation, but I also have parents who are aging, and I had an aging grandmother, and I take a different approach. It's not me asking what they've done or telling them not to do this, but educating them for as long as they can be educated on the scams and the things that are going on. So daily we hear about scams targeted to the elderly and women in particular. And so I try to just keep educating them. And then say, if you have a question, let me know. And by the way, don't click on anything on your computer and don't answer the phone. If you need something from Bell Canada, you'll call Bell Canada. So sometimes you just have to flip it around, and as opposed to trying to parent the parent, because that
they don't like
usually doesn't go down so well.
They're not around that long. Taking advice or taking orders from other people. That's why they're still around. I'm convinced. But having said that, there's that piece where you're protecting maybe an aging parent, a mom, what have you. But then there's also the women who are hiring women who are trying to prevent themselves from being victim to these sort of predatory marriages, right? Where you kind of get love bombed and person want, you're whisked away and everything's awesome until they're not awesome anymore.
Yeah. So Canada has the highest incidence, according to the Canada Fraud Center, of romantic scams.
Right.
So being duped by the great looking pictures and then, the request to send money. And it's sad. Like that sort of stuff. And it's in the millions and millions of dollars, the value of the romance scams annually.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it really is education, isn't it? Like where women understand that if a person is like, it's always nice to, feel the love and the person wants to get with you. They want to live with you. They want to get married or, probably slow it down. Like I had somebody on about online scams. And if somebody even online is trying to get you to do things quickly, say, hey, take a deep breather. Say, let me call you back at the number you just called me to verify it. So slow down and sort of think it through. Don't get caught up.
Sure.
The definition, I guess, of being caught up is like, okay, let's move quickly. And maybe it sounds like having a community of people who are educating you as well is really important, it sounds like, as well. Yeah.
I think many of these predatory situations, unfortunately, happen sort of in secret behind closed doors. And the predators, by design, intentionally want to make sure that family and friends and bankers and medical professionals are just not at all involved. So nobody can give any evidence as to what happened or didn't happen, whether the person was, capable or incapable or being influenced, and by whom. So you have to keep that in mind too.
Well, I guess that kind of comes up with the next question I have, which is discovering that a predatory marriage took place after someone passed away. It sounds like that's one of the reasons that comes up after someone passes away, because you're saying things are happening more in secret.
Yeah. And it's those cases that are in secret that are the most difficult to attack, because when the family finds out about it and they say, oh no, this couldn't be, and they try to set aside the marriage, and then all of the consequences, the financial benefits that flowed from that marriage, they're put to a rigorous test of proving incapacity. And if there is no evidence, and remember I said capacity is time, task, and situation specific. You don't have that kind of evidence, you're not going to be successful in trying to set aside the outcome. And even with more equitable remedies that we're seeing these days, like the doctrine of unconscionability, for example, it's difficult to get there. And so often the families are devastated. They feel badly because they didn't know and they didn't protect their loved one.
Yeah.
And then they can't do anything about the financial consequences. And so that, coupled with the fact that the common law has not developed and makes it very difficult for us to set aside these marriages, many of these cases that get prosecuted don't end up in the right result. And it's not all, but the majority, I'm going to say, and that holds true in Canada and England and many jurisdictions across the world.
Well, if you're saying it, you don't have to be of sound mind to get married. How do you say that was a predatory marriage and death? That's the really devastating part, right? It's like
So hence
that'll make you crazy.
To put different factors in place for determining whether a person was able to understand the contract of marriage, which necessarily includes the financial components of it. One of the cases, now a few years old in Ontario, was the Chivallo case. And that case wasn't a capacity to marry case, but it concerned George Chivallo, the heavyweight champion, and whether or not he had the capacity to reconcile. And the court said, no, he didn't, because he couldn't understand the financial consequences of reconciliation. So maybe the needle moved forward a little bit by the courts in terms of the outcome, but like the courts really are constrained by this common law that developed so many years ago, which is just out of date.
Yeah. Yeah. It as I said, it's crazy making that you don't need to not be crazy. You can be crazy and still get married. I mean, it's going to take me a while to fully digest that. Yeah. But, we definitely, there definitely needs to be more change happening to prevent more of these things from happening as well. And, just based on what you're saying, in the law, there's not much protection. So how do we even, so we don't end up in these scenarios, how do we even prevent these marriages from taking place? And I think it's going to be challenging because what you're saying is they're happening in secrecy. So how do we even prevent them?
Look, Jackie, even when my clients come to me and they say, oh, I think this predatory relationship is happening. I think my dad is going to marry the door-to-door salesperson that he met. And right. He thinks that he's in love. How do I stop it? And the answer is, you can't. You can't stop it. In Ontario, there's no caveat system that you can register with the persons who convene marriages. And even in jurisdictions where they have caveats that are lodged that have to be removed after proof that the person is capable of consent, they're I'm told ineffective. So I think it's a bit of a lot of things. So awareness, maybe getting some new legislation in place for the people who convene marriages and training for those who convene marriages to look out for these sorts of things.
Right.
But then also, a great case that changes our common law treatment would be great. And some legislation that gives the court the tools to look at it in a predatory lens. So, for example, a Predatory Marriages Act that sets out, some sort of legislation that the court can apply to remedy the situation.
Yeah, we clearly need better laws to protect us. Is there anything going in that? Is there any, developments or solutions that are happening to protect?
The revocation of marriage stuff. There's some changes in marriage legislation. Some countries are putting legislative protections in place that prevent, for example, a care worker or nurse from marrying the person that they're looking after. So there are little bits and pieces of things being done all over the place there, but it's not enough. And we do a lot of advocacy around this with just out in the community and with the police. And I, may have written a letter to the powers that be in our government who have some pull and say. I think we'll get there, but we're not there yet. You have to appreciate that marriage is a social construct that our society wants to uphold. So we don't want to make it too difficult for somebody to marry, but there's got to be some workaround, right? There's the love aspects of it. We never want to deny somebody the comfort that comes and the happiness that comes from that relationship, especially when you're older. Right. But then how do we protect the property components of it? And that's a big question. Some of the situations, though, are so terrible, and the capacity of the person is so compromised that there's no way the person themselves can extricate themselves from the situation or even be aware that it's happening. So that's also difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those things that seems easier to get into and much harder to get out of, right?
Yeah, but Jackie, I think that comes from any marriage, right?
Yeah, I just think so. First of all, I want to thank you so much for shedding light on these important issues. And I want to really put out there to our listeners, first of all, nobody ever imagines themselves in these scenarios, right? Where you potentially could be losing capacity in a way, that you're falling in love with someone who might have different ideas about, what they want out of the relationship than you do. And it's all about protecting your assets, right? If you worked so hard to build, why not protect? And that's really why I want to say estate planning isn't just about your assets and protecting your wealth. It's also protecting your autonomy and making sure your wishes are respected. I think that's one of the most important things is just don't wait until it's too late. I know we're all busy and, you can always put stuff off because something else is more important, but don't wait until it's too late. Like you really, really deserve to preserve and protect what you've worked so hard for, and to live the life that you've envisioned for yourself. And again, nobody expects to be in that situation. As you said, marriage is challenging anyway, but it's important to know that love doesn't conquer all. And you're better off to put a plan together to secure your assets for the long term and go to a marriage. Like I think I saw a term recently, Kimberly, that I wanted to share with you. And it said, most people, they marry emotionally and they divorce logically, right?
Yeah, well.
And truly we want to, what's that?
Statistically, the likelihood of divorce is it's going to happen. And so you're foolish not to plan for it. But even when my daughter was 23, I said, you need to put a will in place and a power of attorney in place. You need to put your mind to what you want to have happen. And you're never too young, except if you don't have the requisite age capacity to do these documents. But it's important to plan.
It is
in an era of fraud and scams. We see it every day.
Absolutely. And you know what I find for people who are they're in control of their lives and they feel really in control of their destiny, it's almost impossible to imagine themselves in a vulnerable state, but it can happen just like that. Right. So definitely put a plan together to secure your assets, secure the assets for your family, and to, again, live that life that you want. And if you actually want to learn more about Kimberly Whaley and Kimberly Whaley estate litigation, please reach out to her. You can see she's a wealth of knowledge, and we'll obviously be providing a link to her website in our show notes. So look out for that. And also, if you found this episode valuable, please share it with someone who you think might benefit. And as always, Confidant community, please stay informed, stay empowered, and of course, join us again next time for the High Earning Woman podcast. And if you're ready to secure your future from any financial setbacks that you might face, feel free to reach out to us. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and all of our social media channels for the latest updates. Have a great rest of the day, Confidant community, and see you next time on the High Earning Woman podcast. Take care, everybody. Bye now.